You ready for rapid fire?
No more QB talk. It's rapid fire time.
Well, there'll be a little bit here of QB talk. First, though, from Fighting Irish Fan 91, Sean, is it true? No Freeman access after practice, no cameras allowed tonight. Those are both true statements. We were originally supposed to get to interview Marcus Freeman on the field, and we were originally supposed to be able to take pictures and video of the first 5 periods of practice, as always, but we were told because they're going to a place that is not their home practice facility, we're not allowed to do that. I'm not exactly sure what one has to do with the other, but that's what we're told, and so that is how
the rules are the
it
rules.
will be. Those are the rules. Chi-Town, what's your prediction for the 2024 starting quarterback? CJ Carr, Steve Angeli, Kenny Minchey, or a grad transfer?
I see Kenny Minchey as the starter going into 2024, and I think CJ Carr just won't be quite along the. And today, like, actually, what really is kind of swaying this for me is just kind of talking through what we did today, just the opportunity and all of the reps and exposure that Kenny Minchey is going to get this season. Like, he's going to get an entire year on CJ Carr, and there's nothing that CJ Carr can do to make up for that, that experience that he's going to be getting. So I think it's going to take CJ Carr a little bit of time. But I would have to say it's going to be Kenny Minchey if I had to make a prediction on August 8th of 2023.
Interesting. I'm going to go, this is just as of now, because, again, my opinion might change when we get to see these guys hopefully do some live stuff tonight when we go to practice. But for right now, I'm going to say graduate transfer. I'm not, again, that can change. Hopefully it does change, because we've talked about it, Jesse. When you talk about the ascension that you want at quarterback, ultimately, if your program is in good shape, you want to be developing top young talent, and you bring them in, and within a year or two, they're the starter. And you're going to have to deal with some transfers along the way of some good quarterbacks as well, because not everyone's going to get to start. And it's happened at other big programs, Georgia being a prime example, where, Ohio State being another. Like, guys are going to transfer if they're not playing. But if you're recruiting at a high enough level and you're developing these guys, ultimately that's still going to be a good thing, because you're just going to bring in the next one behind them. But for right now, I'm going to stick with graduate transfer. But ask me Thursday, because my opinion, like I said, we could see something tonight that'll change my mind, kind of tip it on that. Not that I'm going to go all in probably based on one practice tonight, but I would still say grad
stronger
transfer.
Feeling after at least
tonight. Yeah, exactly. We get to see him live. Okay, so Rhode Island graduate transfer safety Antonio Carter says he's playing what the Irish call the Aztec package, 3 safety sub package for the defense. Here's what he said about it. Quote, I get to do different things like blitz, cover, get in the post, play curl, flat, different things like that. That's perfect for me, because I do see myself as versatile. It's a versatile position. You're in the box, but you get deep as well. You cover, you blitz. It's kind of like a rover, I guess you would say, more of an athletic rover. End quote. Again, that's Antonio Carter, the guy they brought in from Rhode Island. What do you think about it, Mr. Defense?
So I just think, first and foremost, I don't know how I haven't said this before, but just like, it's such a cool opportunity for Antonio Carter to be a guy from Rhode Island that gets to transfer
to Notre
Dame. Like, it's just like,
and be
the stage is like immediately way more drastic. So like, first of all, kudos to him, because that's super cool. But this Aztec position, this is something that's really intriguing to me because of the analogy that he made, and the way he described it, it does sound like it's just a more athletic rover, but it's going to be in specific packages where you're getting an extra safety on the field. So a lot of, I would assume 3rd and longs, maybe 2nd and longs, with a 3rd and long anticipated after it's 2nd and long. But to me, the immediate thing I thought of when he started talking about this and the fit that it has is Caleb Williams, because by the time you get to USC in the season, you want a guy who is athletic enough in the box to be a supporter in the run game, basically be a quarterback spy. And he's got, if he can practice at this all season and play in the box, then he can show he's got the speed, He's got the tackling ability, and he's got the closeout ability to really just get in Caleb Williams' face so he can extend all of those plays like he did last year. And then if the play is breaking, downfield, then he can still get down into coverage as necessary. So I think it's a tremendous role. And to me, again, it shows the layers and depth to Al Golden's defense. And I think that's another thing that you're really going to start to see this year, is that more kind of, NFL style approach of there's a lot of different sub packages of personnel depending on, what's given to you. And I feel like just it being Al Golden's second year, there's going to be a lot more comfortability among these players. And you're going to be able to see these guys working on different combinations of players and sets. And I think that's something to be really excited about.
Yeah. And Andrew says, I just don't want him to get too cute. Sounds cool, but 3 safeties. I guess it's third and long in the red zone. Don't forget, it wasn't that long ago when you had Jalen Elliott, Alohi Gilman, and Kyle Hamilton in that 3 safety package. Now,
right.
Hamilton was obviously a little bit of unicorn because of his, length and, his skill set and all that kind of stuff. But safety was an asset on that team. They had depth at safety, and they had 3 guys who could play, and they found a way to get them on the field together at the same time. And if they're looking at a package like this, I don't think it's just going to be a window dressing type package. You just gave the perfect example right there. Caleb Williams, when you're defending him and you need an extra defensive back on the field, you're also going to have one of the more experienced safeties in Antonio Carter as well. Now not experienced necessarily at safety, but like Chris O'Leary has talked about how this guy can lay some wood on you. Xavier Watts can lay some wood on you. Thomas Harper, I would have to imagine, will probably be on the field in those situations as well. There's another ton of experience that you're going to have. So you're putting potentially, you're putting a lot of experience out there on the field. And I think they're only going to do it if they think that is something that is going to benefit them. And I love the idea of it, getting those kind of guys all out there on the field at the same time. And like Caleb Williams makes sense, whether it's Ohio State and their passing offense, I think there's a lot of things potentially. I just think it makes you more versatile when you have that kind of package. It's not like they're going to, go out there and probably run it 80 or 85% of the time. It's a sub package. And
but it's ready when needed.
Exactly. And you use it because they obviously think that it is a potential position of strength. When you're able to put 3 safeties like that on the field at the same time. Okay, so an interesting report came up from Florida Sports Buzz. Notre Dame will not host the Miami Hurricanes next season as originally scheduled because the Hurricanes scheduled too many non-conference opponents for next season. So this leaves Notre Dame with home games against Northern Illinois, Miami, Ohio, Louisville, Stanford, Florida State, and Virginia. The Irish and Hurricanes are still going to play in 2025 in Miami, and then the Hurricanes will come here in 2026 instead of next season. But for now, there's a hole in next year's schedule. So what do you make of this whole mess?
I think that this mess has created a snooze fest in terms of this hole in their schedule and then the potential of, what the remaining 5 opponents are at home that season as of now. Northern Illinois, yawn. Miami of Ohio, yawn. Louisville, everyone's so high on them this year, but I mean, we'll have to see. That's like a half yawn. Stanford would be a full yawn if it's not, it's just there's still meaning behind it. Like it's a meaningful game to alumni and fans because of the rivalry and how long you've played them for so long. Like, even if you don't like it, whatever it is, it's Stanford. Florida State, I think, is the most exciting home game on that schedule. And then, there's potential that of Virginia maybe being somewhat good. But I just think that, and not to say that Miami was like this big, great opponent on the home schedule, but it takes away a really good opponent in a rivalry that has existed in the past. So I just think it really, really shortens the amount of good games at home that year drastically.
And when you don't have USC coming in a given year, and you've got Stanford instead, who we'll talk about in a second, but nobody wants right now, and Florida State is your most marquee game, Miami would have been your second most marquee game. This just like, I don't know how this happens. Like, does the administration at Miami, like, do they pay attention to anything? They're not paying attention to what the boosters and donors are doing. They're just letting them illegally give out money everywhere. And like, how, an administrator has to sign off on these things when these games are scheduled, whether it's the top or the middle or whatever, somebody has to sign off on it. Is it possible to fill this spot that late is what Tim is saying. That's a good question. It feels like this is something the ACC needs to step in and say, look, Miami, you're scheduled to play Notre Dame. We've got a contract with Notre Dame. Every team in our conference is subject to that to that contract, and you are supposed to be there next year. So, like Florida A&M, I know, going to Miami is a big deal to them, and they're going to get a big paycheck for doing it. It just feels like someone needs to step in and cut an extra big check and say, Florida A&M, you're going to get this money, even though we're not going to play you next year, but we'll see you, in a year or two or whatever. It shouldn't be on Notre Dame to have to go out and, look around and find somebody else to fill a hole in its schedule because Miami administrators can't do their job.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking about when I first read this too, is like, how is Miami not kind of handcuffed to, the fact that they have to play Notre Dame? Like, you schedule them first. It is your own fault, and it should be, in my opinion, that Notre Dame stays on the schedule, and they have to go back to whoever and say, hey, like, we messed up. We can no longer pay you, and we now have to suffer the financial consequences of who that might be. But I think the more interesting question would be, if it doesn't pan out and there's still this hole in the schedule, what direction would you want to see them go towards? Like a Big Ten opponent, an SEC opponent, sub in another ACC opponent? Like, is there too much of dreaming compared to like what the realistic options might be?
I don't know. It's too early to even know. And like Derek or someone was saying, Derek was saying, I thought Louisville is who the ACC subbed in. I hadn't heard, I'm just looking at the reports that are out there, and I had not seen that. But so I don't know. Maybe that is the case. So maybe it's taken care of, and that's fine. But then, that just means that someone else. Well, I guess my point is Notre Dame should not have to be responsible for filling that hole. It should be up to the conference and Miami to get it all figured out. So hopefully that is the case. I don't know. But like Chi-Town was saying, put Army in there, and it's like Chi-Town really loves, those service academies. Like just like fill the whole schedule with service academies. I'm not quite as high on that as Chi-Town is, though.
Yeah, they look good, but they're not exciting games ultimately, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right. So the ACC, speaking of them, they're considering adding Pac-12 leftover Stanford and Cal in the meantime. And that is still being discussed right now. But SI's Pat Forde has an interesting proposal himself. He said on the College Football Inquirer podcast that one possible way forward that he sees for Stanford after being left hanging is for the football team to go independent and for all of their sports to try to schedule Notre Dame as much as possible. Do you buy or sell that?
So this is like an ongoing debate that I've seen the last couple of days of, like what is going to happen. I think this falls under the umbrella of what's going to happen to the rest of the teams outside of, the big market of why these conferences are shifting, and that's football. And we kind of touched on a little bit last week of like, what about the baseball and softballs of the world that have to travel all the way across the country now, throughout the day, and then get back and be expected to go to class. And so it's like, does it make sense just for, football to, in this case, Stanford, to really ultimately do its own thing and then allow the rest of the sports programs to ultimately decide what's going to be best for their student athletes? I don't know how Notre Dame necessarily fits into that because it's still all the way out in California, right? Like it's still a pretty big hike between Stanford and Notre Dame. So I don't see that necessarily actually helps the rest of Stanford athletics. Like, I guess
obviously you're not going to play, like baseball is not going to play 3 series a season. I think he's just saying to help sort of raise, the profile and stuff like that. I think that ultimately, You know, like when BYU football went independent, all their other sports were still in a conference, just like with Notre Dame. And Stanford would have to figure that out, whether it's the Mountain West or whatever it happens to be. They're unless they end up in the ACC, and again, that is still out there, and the thing with Cal is out there as well. I don't see what, one, the question Tim has, could Stanford survive as an independent? I don't see it. Like BYU couldn't survive as an independent, and BYU, even though they weren't as successful as Stanford in the same time period when BYU was making a go of it as an independent, they still have a bigger profile. And Stanford just doesn't have a big enough profile. That's why they're in the situation that they're in right now. That's why they're the unwanted part of this whole thing. You've seen when Notre Dame goes out there to Stanford, even in their good seasons, they're not always sold out, and they don't even have that big a stadium. So I don't think that Stanford could make it as a football independent. They're not going to have a TV contract. They would have a heck of a time trying to make that happen. I don't see it. As to the Notre Dame aspect of it, again, it's like I get kind of what he's saying, but because you're talking about West Coast and the middle of the country, that's like why should Notre Dame have to kind of pick up the slack for Stanford and have to be involved in all that extensive travel when they're already traveling to all these somewhat farther away spots in the ACC, the Florida schools and such. So I don't see it happening, and the biggest reason is I don't think Stanford can cut it as an independent. And like when you look at the whole Stanford Cal ACC, I've been sitting back and looking at this whole thing. Like the biggest benefit, because one of the concerns, obviously, of Florida State and Clemson and these schools that are talking about leaving the ACC is they're not getting enough money. Well, if you add Cal and Stanford, all you're doing is adding another mouth to feed. Like that's
you're just adding a bigger divider.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's just another divisive point, and the fact that then you're adding in all this travel and everything else. The biggest benefit that I could see is like when you go into a new cable market, TV market, cable market. ACC has the ACC network. Like the biggest benefit to the Big Ten in getting Rutgers and Maryland is the fact that in New York and New Jersey and Maryland, all those cable companies that were there, all the subscribers had to start paying, an extra fee because the Big Ten network was added, and the Big Ten network gets that revenue. It would be the same for the ACC network. Like if they could add, San Jose, San Francisco, that whole area out there, they'd get a little bit more cable revenue, I think, because the ACC network would be added. But I don't know if that's going to be enough, again, to make the rest of the schools happy that you're adding a couple of schools potentially, and you're adding travel to the mix to get out there. Okay, so on that same subject, Muffet McGraw, here's a tweet from her in the wake of all the conference reshuffling. Time to stop whining about where college football is headed and figure out how to save the rest of college sports. Let football break with the NCAA and form their own league, and let college basketball and Olympic sports continue the conference model. There has to be another way to preserve all that's good in college athletics and give our student athletes the experience they deserve. So do you buy the idea of basically, all this stuff is TV driven, and it's TV driven because of football? Do you buy or sell the idea football is its own thing and all of the other sports basically need to stay in regional conferences to cut down on all the travel that is coming for all these different lower revenue programs?
Yeah, I actually think this is a big buy for me. And it wouldn't have been a buy for me, obviously, like a year ago. But it is very clear that football wants to be, basically wants to run the show, and really just generate. It's all about, the revenue that's being generated. And so if that's what they want to do, I don't think that it's a good idea to be forming these basically 4 mega conferences, because I do like the structure of it, and I do like conference champions and etc. And I like the way that it's formatted, and I think it dwindles down to getting the best teams playing the best teams. But I think that the Olympic sports and the smaller sports do need some sort of structure, or it's just it's going to fall apart, and it's not going to be quite the same anymore. So, and it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't make sense for these programs and these student athletes to constantly having to be traveling across the country while still trying to go to class and stuff. Like, a lot of people are going to say, okay, yeah, that's what they signed up for, but they didn't sign up to be traveling, across the country and getting back at 4 a.m. and still having to go to class or, whatever it might be. And I saw a good point the other day too. Like, a lot of these recruits, pick where they want to go regionally because it's close to home regionally, and their parents can travel regionally. And now it's like, well, now you're expecting, these recruits,
California kids who went to USC and UCLA, they're not going to be able to go to many road games now.
Right, exactly. So it just, I think it has a much more impact than what football and these big conferences realize. But they're at the end of the day, it's clear they don't care about that. They're not concerned about that. And so if that's a very obvious message, then I think these, some of these not smaller tier or lower tier sports, but in terms of revenue, yeah, these kind of second tier sports have to kind of survive on their own and figure out a model that best works for them and the student athlete.
Yeah. I mean, a couple of good points here. Andrew, Muffet's salary at Notre Dame, Muffet's big salary at Notre Dame is thanks to football. She should remember that. It's a fair point, Andrew. But remember, Notre Dame is independent when it comes to football. So it's kind of an apples to oranges situation because Notre Dame is not bound by, these conference alignments like we're talking about, because Notre Dame wants to stay independent. So it's the same but different. But really, you would still, obviously if Oregon, for example, is getting, Big Ten TV revenue, they'd still get their Big Ten TV revenue. But you could also have, the rest of the sports stay in their own region, save money by doing so. And then there's still, Chi-Town, the other, like I said, a couple of good points. He says, I don't disagree with the premise, but not sure how logistics would pan out by unrolling the TV contracts, because I think the TV contracts is for all sports, not just football. It is for all sports, but basically that's what you would have to do. You need to separate it. And remember, football is the only, like FBS football specifically, Division I, 1A, whatever you want to call it, the FBS and then the FCS and all divisions below, and all the other sports have NCAA sponsored championships. FBS football, Power 5 football, the big boy football, whatever you want to call it, their championship is not sponsored by the NCAA. So it's already separate in that matter, so they're already fairly close to doing it. And like Muffet is saying that the NCAA needs to step in. There is so much entanglement because of the fact that you have a body like the NCAA that wants to say that they have oversight. They don't really have oversight. They're just enforcing, whatever rules they randomly select to enforce. But when it comes to stuff like this, it really is up to the conferences. But I think everyone can see it, but like the people at the schools are blinded by the dollar signs. Everyone can see that it is not good for the for the athletes. And by the way, with the conferences doing all this, like I've always hesitated to use the term student athlete anyway, but they're just showing that the student in this obviously doesn't matter, because you're talking about more lost class time when you're talking about coast to coast travel, for schools like UCLA, USC, Rutgers, Oregon, Washington, all these, all this coast to coast, and even getting in and out of Happy Valley and Penn State. It might not be coast to coast, but that is a small airport in there. And, the roads in there are small, and not everybody charters, and you're going to need a charter to get into Happy Valley, especially if you're coming from the coast. But it is not about the student part of things. It is about the athlete part of things. And it is just easier when you've got these conferences that are now spread out all over the country. It's much easier to do it once a week on a Saturday for football than it is for these other sports that play 2 to 3 times a week, and there are a lot more trips involved, and obviously a lot longer trips that are involved.
And mainly what you talked about, it includes weekdays. It's not, just primarily the weekend. Like,
right.
Not only does football get to play only, once a week, but again, they get the advantage of playing primarily Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Like, that's all where their travel is going to be, potentially Thursday too, like Thursday through, the end of the game Saturday. You might be getting home early in the morning Sunday, but again, the point is they have the weekend, right? And it's just, this whole thing is a clear advantage to football and football only. And it's just sad to see. Like, I'm really curious to see what things are going to look like 5 years from now. Like, what are we going to say looking back on this time 5 years from now? Because I think it's going to still look completely different.
Yeah, I concur. All right, well, we are winding down here. I'm going to throw this one at you. I just saw this afternoon. Fill in the blank. It's blank that Colin Cowherd included the late Dwayne Haskins on his list of current quarterbacks who can't win a Super Bowl.
It's completely unacceptable, and it's really just it's laziness on behalf of a lot of people. It's laziness of whoever put the graphic together, and not noticing Dwayne Haskins' name on the list. It's lazy on behalf of Colin Cowherd to not review the work, and then also while he's on the show, have the ability to like mentally read that name and not say it out loud. And honestly, I'm not trying to make this into a funny moment or light of a bad situation, but like, it reminds me of Anchorman, where he reads the prompts and
whatever's on the screen,
on the screen. And, in that specific instance, he tells San Diego to F off or whatever it is. And like, that's how it felt. It felt like an Anchorman moment where it's just like, how did Colin Cowherd really let that go through? And how did his team really let that go through? And I do think he owes a public apology. Like, it's not acceptable, and it's insensitive to his, while I get it, it's a mistake. It's still insensitive to his teammates, his friends, his family, and everyone that's, associated or basically anyone that Dwayne Haskins had an impact on is almost owed an apology, in my opinion. It's tremendously lazy. It's unprofessional.
It's not even just Colin Cowherd. He's got a staff of people, because
like, it goes through so many layers before it gets on the TV.
He's got producers, like, watching the video that people posted of this when he's talking about it. They put up an on-screen graphic that listed all these quarterbacks, and Dwayne Haskins was listed on this graphic. It's not just that Colin Cowherd said it. It's that, a combination of him and his producers put Dwayne Haskins on that list. And it's just another example how you cannot take anything Colin Cowherd says seriously. It is all just a show. Everything is for clicks and, hits and whatever else. It is just to say things, and now I guess, maybe to an extent it's mission accomplished, because we're sitting here talking about it and people are tweeting about it on social media as well. But it is just a disgrace that someone who claims to know as much as he knows about football and sports could put someone's name like Dwayne Haskins on that list and say the name out loud and not even have it like, oops, wait, hold it.
Yeah, nothing registered with him. That's what I'm so, like, it's so shocking that nothing, like, he had to, like, when you're reading something, you read it and then you say it, and then before you read the next one, you read it. You know what I mean? Like, he had to read it, say it, and continue, and still not realize through that whole process that he made a mistake.
Yeah, I mean, Alex says it may be dark, but technically he's not wrong. I mean, technically that is right. Dwayne Haskins can't win a Super Bowl, but it was supposed to be a list of current quarterbacks who can't win a Super Bowl. So it's just a disgrace. And, I just saw recently that supposedly ESPN is in talks with him to maybe even bring him back to ESPN off FS1. So it's a joke. He's a joke. His takes are jokes. It's just another sign that you can't take anything that he says seriously. And it's why, so few times, there are other takes and, people who will say things specific, especially to college football, who we will talk about their takes, but you're not going to hear me talk about Colin Cowherd's takes other than something like this, because I think it shows what he really is and how serious a person he really is. So that's why we brought it up today. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today. We've got practice that I'm going to be heading to here in about an hour.
For you.
That's right. King of the long nights. So we will be doing that and be back tomorrow, of course, and Thursday as well. Don't forget, no more Friday evening show. We'll be doing Countdown to Kickoff starting here in a couple of weeks when the season starts, but it'll be tomorrow and Thursday for our show, and then that'll be it for this week as we get a little bit.
I got to get hibernated for the season. No Friday shows. I get a couple of Fridays off.
By the way,
get hibernated for those.
18 days from game day. 18 Steve Angeli days from game day right now.
Very nice.
All right. Hit the like button, subscribe, rate, and review, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on IB Nation Sports Talk.